Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining. My name is Danielle Coe. I am the CEO and founder of Black Women in Clinical Research. The mission of Black Women in Clinical Research is to educate, empower, support, and help Black women thrive in the clinical research industry. This is the last webinar for our 4-week series for the Black History Month event for Black Women in Clinical Research. And today's theme is excellence is to do a common thing in an uncommon way. We have Dr. Jayne Morgan here with us today to discuss COVID-19, vaccines and trials, and beyond Tuskegee. So with that being said, I'm gonna give an introduction of Dr. Morgan. Dr. Morgan is a cardiologist and the clinical director of the COVID task force at the Piedmont Healthcare Corporation in Atlanta, Georgia. Within this role, she is developing ongoing community outreach in conjunction with the Division of Diversity and Inclusion between Piedmont and the African American community it serves. Additionally, Dr. Morgan will be analyzing the science and data from Piedmont and nationally surrounding the disproportionately negative impact of COVID-19 on minority communities. Ultimately, the goal is to identify methods as well as areas of improved triage, screening, and algorithms for the overall outcomes management of disadvantaged populations positive for COVID-19. Dr. Jayne Morgan is a native of Atlanta and completed her BS degree at Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm also, AUC love. She also has a medical degree at Michigan State University, East Lansing, Michigan, internal medicine residency at George Washington University in Washington, D.C., and both her cardiology and pacemaker fellowships at Mount Sinai Medical Center in Miami, Florida. So thank you so much, Dr. Morgan, for meeting with me today. We are super excited to hear you talk about, COVID-19, the vaccine and trials, and beyond Tuskegee.
Thank you. I appreciate the invitation tonight. Thank you so much, Danielle, to be here and have an opportunity to talk with people like-minded, right? Interested in clinical research, scientific background. We are steeped in STEM, and that's really kind of where we are. I'm leading the COVID task force. My background has been very varied. I do have a medical degree and completed both a residency and a cardiology fellowship practice for a while, and then was recruited by Solvay Pharmaceuticals to join their company to lead a lot of their phase 1 work. And so eventually, over a few years of being in the pharmaceutical industry, I decided to go full-time into research, but it was a decision that required a lot of time. And in fact, for the first few years that I was in industry, I still kept my medical practice going, and then also was working full-time. So that was really, it turned out to be a sort of an untenable situation after a while, something that was not sustainable for the long haul. And so I ended up continuing on in research, but always enjoyed practicing medicine. So I am pleased to be here with people and in front of people who are like-minded, interested in science, not necessarily a popular subject or a popular area for women to be in, and yet here we are. And so what do we need to know and what do we need to understand? So I want to talk with you today about the COVID vaccine and also about the larger context of clinical trials. And what do clinical trials mean for minority communities, for populations of color, specifically for the African American community. But since, our group here is women in medicine, I want to start with Dr. James Marion Sims. Dr. Sims was known as the father of gynecology. He had a huge bronze statue erected in his honor in New York. He developed a procedure that corrected fistulas in women. Fistulas are small holes or connections that should not be there, that are connecting the vagina to the rectum or the vagina to the urethra. And if those develop, you end up with a lot of discomfort, you can have infections, your entire quality of life can be impacted. He developed a procedure that corrected these fistulas, developed a repair for them, and then went on to be lauded as the father of gynecology because he restored such quality of life to so many women. But the part of the story that wasn't told is that he developed these procedures by practicing on Black women. He did these procedures, I say procedures, but what am I really saying? I'm saying surgery. He performed surgeries on these women. These are practice surgeries. He doesn't know how to do this procedure. He's learning. And he performed these practice surgeries on women, including resecting tissue, cutting things out, sewing them up, while he tried to teach himself the best way to repair these surgeries. These procedures, and I mean surgeries, were done without anesthesia. Women screaming and writhing and begging for mercy on his table. He showed no mercy for them. They had no advocacy. They had no autonomy over their bodies. Many of them were there just to have food and a place to sleep. And they underwent this torture chamber. One woman in particular underwent 30 or 40 different surgeries with no anesthesia. Imagine that. Just so that she could eat. Imagine how mangled and disfigured and dysfunctional she also is at the end of all of these practice surgeries used as lab rats. He finally did perfect this procedure. And when he perfected it, he rolled it out with great success to white women in whom he performed the surgery under anesthesia. They were comfortable, they had great outcomes, and he went on to be heralded as the father of gynecology. In 2018, we were finally successful in having that statue of him removed permanently. These are the kinds of stories that even if we don't know the details inherently, we understand. Inherently, we know that research has been done in a nefarious way with Black people, with Black women. It's not just the Tuskegee experiment. There are many, many, many examples. And so it's not a surprise when we look at this COVID vaccine that there isn't great acceptance. When we look at this at our healthcare system, opioid addiction has been rampant in the white community. That is not by happenstance. That is not random. The reason for that is that Black patients, when they are seen by white physicians, are not seen in a sympathetic manner oftentimes, and are not prescribed pain medicine to control your pain to the same degree as white people. We are not perceived as having pain. We're perceived as either exaggerating pain or even being drug seekers. If you take issue with that, when we look at the number and amount of prescriptions that are written for opioids, white people receive 30 times the amount of opioid prescriptions as Black people. Do we have 30 times less pain? We are left not only to manage our pain, which is physical pain, but that creates psychological pain and delayed healing as well. When we look at the murder of George Floyd in 2020 at the knee of a police officer, one of the things that went unnoticed was the culpability of the healthcare system. When I watched and timed the seconds that went by, when George Floyd, Mr. Floyd, appeared to lose consciousness and the paramedics arrived, there was no attempt at resuscitation for him. No CPR was provided. In fact, they did not even remove his handcuffs, and his hands were cuffed behind his back. He was loaded onto the back of an ambulance like a sack of potatoes and carted away without ever being provided the benefit of resuscitation of life. The primary role of the paramedics is to arrive, assess, resuscitate, and stabilize and transport. That's literally their job. No one attempted CPR on him. And you ask yourself, if that had been a white woman or any other person than a Black male, would there have been no CPR provided for them? And so when we look at this COVID vaccine and we say, why is there hesitancy in populations of color? Why is there hesitancy in the African-American population? We have a triumvirate, a triangle of all three things coming together for this vaccine. We have the healthcare system being involved, where we have a tenuous relationship. We have research being involved, where we absolutely almost have no relationship whatsoever because of historical atrocities. And then we have the United States government being involved, where we also have somewhat of an uneasy relationship. All three of those things come together to bring us this vaccine. And so, of course, there's going to be reticence and there's going to be hesitancy about this vaccine. That should not come as a surprise. When we roll in that there's also a new platform, a messenger RNA, what does that mean? There's not a lot of explanation about it. Then this is where we find that we are in this arena currently. When we look at clinical trials, by and large, African Americans and women do not participate in clinical trials. So when we have data and drugs and devices that are approved here in the US, they are approved with data on white men. When we first began to develop side effects, we developed them after they are being prescribed in our doctor's offices. Because we didn't participate in the trial, so it's unclear whether that data is relevant to us. So we first have side effects that are reported to the FDA when the drugs are approved and they're out in real world use. If we don't participate in clinical trials, we miss the opportunity for access to healthcare. When we talk about access, when you're in a clinical trial, you have access to a full-time clinical research coordinator or a research nurse. You have a principal investigator who is a physician who's overseeing your treatment. There's a regional doctor overseeing that local doctor. There's a national doctor overseeing that regional doctor who's overseeing that local doctor. You have an entire team of people around you. You have people that you can access 24 hours a day for any type of discomfort or side effect that happens to you. Where else do you get healthcare like that? If you are uninsured or underinsured, by and large, your medical care is covered if you are within a clinical trial. This is access. This is narrowing the gap of health equity. And these are the kinds of things that we need to think about. The best and brightest thinking in this world, in science, is embedded in clinical trials. There's not a single drug or device in this country that has not come through a clinical trial, and yet we don't participate. And so it's no wonder then that we also are suspicious of the COVID vaccines. Is any of this data relevant to us? When we look at Donald Trump, when he was president of the United States and he contracted COVID-19, 74 years old, overweight, sitting in the White House desaturating, meaning his oxygen levels were dropping. Every physician knew what was happening and he was on a downward trajectory. They helicoptered him over to Walter Reed. And what happened immediately after he arrived? He received Regeneron's monoclonal antibody therapy. Most people have never heard of that. He received it under EUA, emergency use authorization. You know why we haven't heard of it? Because it's not available to the public. It's within a clinical trial. And the only other people to have access to it would be those who are in clinical trials. That monoclonal antibody therapy cocktail infusion that he received was credited with interrupting his downward course that he clearly was on as his physicians came out and stonewalled the press. That's platinum level healthcare. That's the healthcare that's behind the screen that we don't access. If you are seeing a physician and you're not being offered a clinical trial and you've got a chronic medical condition, then I would posit that you are receiving optimal medical care. Your physician is treating you to the absolute best of evidence-based medicine, of FDA-approved drugs and devices, but you are not being treated maximally. Maximally is access to the future of medicine today. That's maximal therapy. That's health equity. That's access. So let's talk about these COVID vaccines. When I look at the FDA briefing documents for both Moderna and Pfizer that were submitted to the FDA, one of the things that was of interest to me is what is the Black population there within these trials? Because I've already said, we don't really participate in research for all of the reasons that I've outlined. Don't trust the healthcare system for good reason because of inherent bias. We don't trust research for good reason because all of our historical atrocities. We don't trust the U.S. government. U.S. government is the same government that sponsored and sanctioned the Tuskegee experiment. So what are we to think about these COVID vaccines coming out under Operation Warp Speed? When I look at the FDA briefing documents and look at the subpopulation of Blacks, these trials were large trials. Pfizer enrolled 40,000 people and Moderna enrolled 30,000 people. It's a total of 70,000 people. By and large, Blacks participate in clinical trials at somewhere around 4 or 5% or less. And that's with intention, if someone is intentionally trying to recruit you. Pfizer succeeded in having an enrollment rate of 9.3% Blacks, and Moderna succeeded in enrolling 10.3% Blacks. They were both very purposeful and intentional. And while that doesn't really still represent the percentage that we are in the population, 13.4%, it's still the highest numbers I've ever seen in clinical trials that were not specific for Black people. And so they did a pretty good job. And when you think about the numbers, the sheer volume, 70,000 people, and collectively Blacks represented about 10% of that trials, that's 7,000 participants. So I think we can have confidence that the data is relevant to us and that it represents our population. The other thing that was of note in these FDA briefing documents, when we look at the efficacy, you've heard them talk about the efficacy, how well the vaccines actually work, that measurement of how well they work. It's called efficacy. In Pfizer, the efficacy was 95%. I mean, outstanding. Our flu vaccines are anywhere between 48 and 65% on any given year. This was 95%, and Moderna very close at 94.5%. The scientists were applauding. Really, that was just knocking it out of the park. We had not expected such astonishing results. What's even more astonishing, though, when you dig into those FDA briefing documents and look at that population of 7,000 African Americans who participated in that trial, when you look at the percentage or the numbers of that population that developed COVID-19 2 weeks following that second dose, when full immunity is achieved, it was 0. So the efficacy of the subpopulation of Blacks within the trials was actually 100%. The overall trial efficacy was 95%, but the efficacy of this population was 100%. And so another reason that we should have confidence that not only were we represented, but we actually achieved 100% efficacy within the trial, 0 incidences of COVID-19 2 weeks following the second dose. So when we think about clinical trials, when we think about COVID, there are many, many questions. I can answer, a host of questions about COVID vaccines. I know people would like to know maybe something about the time that it took to develop it, maybe something about long haul syndrome, or maybe some other questions. So I'm going to stop there and see if there are questions, and I can answer specific questions. And then if not, I can continue to talk about some other things that might be of interest to you.
Okay, Dr. Morgan, I was going to do a poll, and this is just asking, this is anonymous, so no one will see your answer, but it's just asking whether or not you have taken the COVID-19 vaccine. Some people are saying that it's not yet available to them.
Mm-hmm.
I got a question for you while we're waiting, Dr. Morgan.
Sure.
So is there, if people are interested in taking the COVID-19 vaccine, is there a website that kind of tells people when they're actually rolling out the vaccine to, is it like a criteria that they're doing? How can people get more information about that?
Right. So if you want to know where you are in the vaccine rollout, you can always go to the CDC website. Okay. The CDC websites can let you know where we are in the vaccine rollout. And clearly this vaccine rollout has been less than stellar. Lots of roadblocks, a lot of confusion. A lot of it's we're managing at the state levels, and even more granularly at the state level, it's being managed hospital by hospital. And so, there was no messaging or communication that went out ahead of this vaccine rollout, which clearly was a misstep because people don't understand it. But to get information on where you are in the priority of being called to receive the vaccine, I would just follow the CDC website. Okay.
So 79% of the people in the audience have not taken the COVID-19 vaccine, and 21% have taken the COVID-19 vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
And we do have a couple of questions. So one question that we have is, what do you think about the reports of individuals dying or contracting COVID after the vaccine?
So when you take this vaccine, so we're talking about the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines right now, not Johnson & Johnson or Novavax, that first shot, you do not have immunity starting to develop for the first 8 to 12 days. So that's why we're seeing these cases of people get vaccinated and then they still can contract COVID because you haven't begun to develop any immunity for the first 8 to 12 days. After that, your immunity starts to rise as you get closer and closer to your second shot, but it pretty much gets to about 50 or 60%. So you still have some exposure. It's that second shot that takes you all the way to 95%. And it's one of the reasons we want people to continue to wear a mask, continue to wash your hands, continue to social distance, because as soon as you get the shot, your immunity is not instantaneous. It builds over time. So if you have exposure to COVID while your immunity is still building, you can still absolutely contract COVID.
Okay. And so if everyone could ask questions in the Q&A, I don't want to miss any questions in the chat since the chat is kind of moving fast. The next question that we have, how was targeted recruitment for minorities achieved, or what are ways to do so?
So, one of the things that we know is that 80% of African Americans are seen by choice by Black physicians. And the reason for that is that not only do we select physicians who have some cultural congruence and relatability, but the primary reason we select physicians is for safety. We first go where we first feel safe. Imagine that. We're the only group that selects their physician based on safety. Where can I first go where someone won't harm me? Where my life is valued, where my life is valued equally to a white person. That's the first thing. Imagine. And then the second reason that we choose physicians that are like ourselves and reflect our culture is for respect and comfort, that we don't feel dismissed, that we feel that our questions are heard, that we're not misunderstood, talked down to, addressed inappropriately. All of those things make the entire interaction with the physician, which should be a great relationship building, they make it uncomfortable and untenable. And that patient is not going to be completely transparent to you, which is what you need to be able to really take care of someone. So when we look at all of those things, the primary way that we can really improve recruitment of African Americans into trials is to get African American doctors to be recruited by drug and device and vaccine companies and trained as principal investigators. They are the major influencers of this population, and they hold the bridge with 1 foot in the medical center and 1 foot in the community. They are truly the bridge for the community and the research and industry to move forward. And so I think the physicians are key. Second thing that's key is we have to see leadership in research at study sites, in hospitals, in drug companies. We've got to see leadership that's more diverse, where there's a voice at the table, where people can really represent the entire mosaic of the nation, and therefore move the needle forward in how we want to develop and develop these protocols, and then select our study sites. And the study sites also then have to have leadership at the study sites that are representative of the people that not only that you want to recruit, but are representative of everyone. We're not excluding anyone. We would like to include everyone. And so those are probably two of the key areas that have to be addressed: the physicians being recruited as principal investigators and having really senior experts, trained, experienced, knowledge, educated people in senior leadership roles at these hospitals and also at the pharmaceutical and device companies.
Okay, I'm gonna let someone raise their hand. I'm gonna let them speak.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, this is Octavia. I wanted to know, my husband contracted COVID back in August of last year. And I wanted to know, he's kind of hesitant, whether he should consider taking the vaccine.
Mm-hmm. So for patients like your husband who have already had COVID, it's recommended that they still move forward with the vaccine, because beyond 90 days from his COVID diagnosis, it's unclear what degree of natural immunity he will maintain. Because of that, we would like for patients who've had COVID to still move forward with receiving this vaccine. In fact, both doses of it for now. And that's the recommendation for that, because we're unclear how long that natural immunity will last. And so we do want to see those patients also immunized. Now, that being said, and I'll give the timestamp, what is today, February 26th. That's the recommendation today. This is a moving landscape, right? As we learn more and more and more about it, you've probably heard discussions about if patients have had COVID, do they only need to get one shot? Do they not need to get any? Currently, I'm telling you what it is currently right now. The recommendations from the CDC is that all patients following their COVID infection should still receive both doses of the vaccine.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
So the next question, how was targeted recruitment for minorities achieved, or what are ways to do so?
Right. So one of the ways is with the principal investigators. Remember, we talked about that. We want to recruit people to principal investigators. We want to recruit people to senior roles in hospitals and at study sites. And, you know, those are really the two major ways. And the way that it was achieved, maybe that's what the question is getting at with Moderna and Pfizer, is that they identified places and physicians who were interested in participating in these trials and began to approach those physicians such that they could approach their patients as well. So I hope that answers the question. That still is very intentional and very nuanced, and it is not a widespread practice. And what I'm saying is all companies should be moving forward with inclusion. And for them to move forward with inclusion, we have to do our part as well. We have to be willing to step up and be included in trials. We're concerned about being guinea pigs. But I ask, which side of the spectrum are we guinea pigs really on? Are we guinea pigs at the beginning of research where we're refusing to participate because we don't want people to experiment on us, so therefore we're not participating in the trials? Or are we guinea pigs at the other end of the spectrum after all the trials have been completed and the data submitted to the FDA for approval, and we weren't included? And so it's unclear whether that data has any relevance to us. And when we are having side effects, we're having them out in the real world without control, as opposed to having side effects within a controlled trial with multiple people surrounding you in a bubble and you having access to people. On which ends are we really the guinea pigs?
It sounds like both, really, because people aren't doing, either one, really. So, yeah. Definitely something to think about. Let's get the next person. They have their hand raised.
Good evening. My name is Tyronza Davis. What level or how many people actually will have to be vaccinated so that we can reach herd immunity in order to get some type of normalcy back to life?
So that has been a moving target as well. And so the numbers are different, but right now we're still looking at something north of 80% of the population. And I think as of today, we are at 6.6%.
Oh,
so
wow.
We are far away. Yeah.
Okay, the next question. My family doesn't get vaccinated, but I think I should get the vaccine because I teach. How should I present this to my family?
So it sounds as if maybe you're in a family of anti-vaxxers. I don't know if I'm being too extreme. I don't really know why they're not getting vaccinated. So I'm not sure if you all don't have access or this is just a personal decision. So I'm going to address it as if your family is an anti-vaxxer, a vaxxer family, and I don't know if that's what it is. So that's going to be something, and I don't know how old you are, so I don't know if you're an adult or not an adult or whatever, but you have independent decision-making over your body. And so I don't know what the repercussions are in your family if you were to move forward with it, but as an adult, you are free to make those informed decisions should you choose to do so. How you manage your family dynamics, I don't know. Obviously, if it's something that you really think that you need to talk with them about, then the best policy is just to sit down to say, here's what I've learned, here's what I know, here's what I'm thinking about doing. And then be prepared if people are not supporting you, are you going to go along with them or are you still going to move forward independently? And that's something that you'll have to decide within your family dynamics.
Okay. The next question. Why do we need 2 shots?
So 2 shots for Moderna and Pfizer. Again, these are the 2 drugs that I'm talking about, 2 companies, Moderna and Pfizer. The reason they developed them with 2 shots is that they were really trying to get to that 95% efficacy. That first shot will get you to around 50 or 60%. And it's that second shot that takes you all the way up to that remarkable level of 95% efficacy. That's why after the second shot, if you're going to have side effects, people tend to have more side effects after that second shot because your immune system is really revving up. So you're going to feel it as your immune system revs up like a car starting. And people, if they're going to have side effects, tend to have more severe side effects after that second shot. Those side effects generally are headaches, chills, fever, nausea, vomiting, arm pain, and arm swelling. Those are the major side effects that people will suffer, and sometimes fatigue. If you're going to have side effects, you tend to have them more after that second shot. The older you are, in fact, if you're over 65 and got the Moderna shot, or over 55 and you received the Pfizer shot, you are less likely to have side effects. We saw fewer side effects in older people. They tended to tolerate them better. But that's the reason that we need to have those 2 shots for now.
Okay, the next question. What is the efficacy for African Americans / Black Americans for the Pfizer vaccine after 2 weeks?
So the Pfizer vaccine is taken in 2 shots, 3 weeks apart, 21 days apart. And the Moderna vaccine is taken in 2 shots, 4 weeks apart, 28 days apart. The Pfizer vaccine, taken 21 days apart, then requires another 1 week to reach full efficacy, that 95%. So total time from first shot to full efficacy for Pfizer is 4 weeks. Moderna, which is given 28 days apart, requires 2 weeks after the second dose to reach full efficacy. So if you've received the Moderna vaccine, it requires 6 weeks for you to reach full protection. So the Pfizer vaccine is 2 weeks shorter than the Moderna vaccine.
Okay, the next question. In clinical trials, you are not ensured that you are getting active drug. So how are you getting optimum care if receiving placebo? I think this also makes people hesitant about entering a trial. Can you expound on this, please?
So when you are entering a trial, and this is just simplistic. All trials are not this way, but I think this is what you're talking about. You'll have one active arm where people are receiving the actual, in this case, let's just call it a vaccine, and then another arm where people are receiving a dummy drug, like a sugar or something that's not really the active drug. What people should understand when you're doing clinical trials is whatever medications and things that you need for whatever your medical condition is. So let's say you have heart failure, you have diabetes, or et cetera, you're still receiving the absolute best drugs or therapy for your disease entity. So you're not being denied treatment. You're basically being treated exactly the same as you would if you went to your physician's office. The investigational compound is added on top of that. So that's what placebo means. Placebo doesn't mean that you're on nothing. Placebo just means that you didn't get the investigational compound, but you're still getting all of the drugs that are treating, let's say if it's a diabetes trial, all of your diabetes drug, the same as the person who's in the active arm. You both are being treated optimally for your disease. And then one side is getting this additional investigational compound and the other is not, such that there can be a comparison. And that's what I'm talking about with the access. So even if you are not in the active arm, you have access to the drugs that are approved to treat whatever your medical condition is in either arm.
Okay, let's see. Got someone that raised their hand. Okay, we're going to allow Richard to talk.
Yes, good evening, Dr. Cole. We had Dr. David Shulkin, the former United States Secretary, Veterans Affairs come speak virtually, and he did a Q&A at my job. And that was like, I believe, on Tuesday. And he mentioned that we're looking at possibly by September, maybe not having to worry about masks as much as we do currently. He also mentioned that possibly maybe next year, even if you do get the 2 shots this year, you could be looking at in the following year a booster shot for the vaccine. From where you stand, do you see that, September, maybe not having to worry about masks, and then once again, having a booster shot next year?
So great questions, Richard. So one of the things I think you're talking about is, when do we achieve that herd immunity? And whether we can achieve that by September or not will depend on how much vaccine becomes available. Right now, we really don't have the supply to meet the demand. We've got Johnson & Johnson as a third vaccine coming on board under emergency use authorization probably in the next week. We're expecting 10 million doses. At this point, it looks as if they will only be providing 4 million out of the gate. And so it really is going to depend on how quickly we can ramp up this less than optimal vaccine rollout that we've had, and how soon we can reach that optimal level. And also that will include measurement of the decrease of variants and mutations in our environment. And so I've seen many estimates of August, September, maybe next January, all of 2021. And I think it's really going to depend on how quickly we ramp up, what other companies come forward with vaccines. By the way, we have 135 companies right now working on COVID vaccines. We will certainly need more companies than Moderna and Pfizer to come forward as we build this armamentarium, as we build this wall. And so I can't say with certainty, but I can say that it's not out of the question. Perhaps September could be a good goal. I won't say that it's not. And I think it's reasonable, but I wouldn't be surprised if it were longer. So we'll just see. Right now we have 6.6% of our population immunized. And we're in March for all practical purposes. So we've got a long way to go. And then I think your second question, what was your second question, Richard, you asked me?
Dr. Sulkin mentioned a booster
shot. The third booster shots.
Yeah.
So here's the discussion on booster shots. That's why I brought up the mutations. So as we look at the mutations and the number of times that this virus has changed, it's a number of times. I mean, since it's been here over a year, it's probably had about 3,000 mutations. We're looking at the ones out of the UK, out of Brazil, out of South Africa. And part of the concern of those is that the clinical trials of Moderna and Pfizer had already closed before those mutations developed. So it's likely that those mutations were not around when those trials were being done. And so the vaccine that was developed against all the mutations that came into the trial, but there were some later mutations like the UK, Brazil, and South Africa one that were not around when those trials were done. And so now what both Moderna and Pfizer have done is reformulated to include neutralizing antibodies against these new mutations and have sent that to the NIH for examination. And so the question, which is what I think your expert was getting at, the question is, will we then require a third shot to protect us from these new mutations? Or will Pfizer Moderna develop a new formulation that incorporates both of these types such that all of these mutation neutralizing antibodies are included, or what that means? And so I think the answer to that is we've got to stand by and see what will need to be done, because the other thing that we don't know is how long immunity will last as well with both doses of the vaccine, because we're under emergency use authorization and not FDA approval. So we didn't have all that immunity data when the vaccines became available. So all of these, everything is in real time, which is why I would sort of time and date stamp this video, because what we talk about today might be completely different. But as of today, that's what the discussion is about, these third shots, because the third shots cover all those new variants that weren't around when Moderna and Pfizer were doing their clinical trials. And so now they're having to go back and say, do we need to reformulate? And if so, will that require a booster shot?
Okay, the next question. Knowing the rigorous process of closing a trial, how did the COVID-19 vaccine make it that quick?
So when we look at the SARS-CoV-2 virus, the severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2, this is the virus that's responsible for the disease called COVID-19. It causes the disease of COVID-19. The reason it's called SARS-CoV-2 is because this is the second time that we've seen it. We've seen this before. And when was that? In 2003, we saw it for the first time when we had a SARS outbreak there, largely off of our shores and contained. That was the first time that we saw severe acute respiratory syndrome in 2003. We then saw it again in a similar family in 2012 in the MERS outbreak of Saudi Arabia, which probably went unnoticed by most people outside of the scientific world, a Middle Eastern respiratory virus. So since 2003, all the way to 2020, 17 years, all of the preclinical work was done on the SARS virus. It was all completed. All of the bench work research had been completed. The identification as the spike protein as being the key nidus of transmission of binding to that ACE inhibitor in our cells to create disease, the angiotensin converting enzyme receptor, was how the virus invaded our bodies, had already been identified. The entire genomic sequence of that virus, all 30,000 base pairs, had been identified, sequenced, and analyzed. All of that had been done before we ever even saw our very first case of COVID-19 on our shores. So although it seemed rapid, in the scientific world, it wasn't rapid. It was based on 17 years of continuous work from the first time that we saw the SARS virus. The other thing that then came into play is that the vaccine companies decided to stack the phases of the trial. So we usually have phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Phase 1 is safety, phase 2 is drug dose finding, really, and phase 3 is taking it out to a bigger population for efficacy. Generally, those trials go in tandem. You don't start phase 2 until phase 1 ends. And not only phase 1 ends, but you have full database lock. All of the data is analyzed, is sent to the FDA for review, and then it comes back and you get the green light to do phase 2. So it's a very slow, very laborious process. What they did this time was they did interim analyses. So halfway through phase 1, they looked at the data. It was looking good, so they went ahead and started phase 2 before phase 1 ended. And then an interim analysis of phase 2. If that data was looking great, safety and efficacy, they went ahead and started phase 3. So they stacked them without compromising any safety and were able to move them through very quickly. And then the last thing that happened was, because we were in a pandemic as identified by the World Health Organization, even if it was not recognized by our own US government, we had resources available. Money makes a big difference. So unlimited resources went to these companies to develop it, which means you can hire more people. You can open more study sites. You can enroll more quickly. You can hire more resources. You can pull people from other projects and prioritize this one. And suddenly things can move more quickly. Every project has a budget. And that budget is what every director or every vice president works within to develop their compound that they may be overseeing within the company. You have to work within a budget. If your budget is unlimited and your resources are unlimited, you can do a lot of things. So all three of those things came to bear. 17 years of research, because this is not the first time we've seen SARS. Acceleration of drug development by stacking the phases instead of being in tandem. Providing resources such that all types of possibilities were open. And then the fourth thing is, remember, it doesn't have FDA approval. FDA approval will require another 1 or 2 years because FDA wants to see all of that follow-up data from people after they received the last dose to determine how long immunity lasts. That's why we don't have the immunity data. We have all the safety, we have all the efficacy, but we don't have immunity data. FDA only required 2 months of immunity data to grant the emergency use authorization. Otherwise, our population would have to wait another year or 2 to get all of the immunity data completed. So all of those things came together for this acceleration, which seems like an acceleration, but it's less of an acceleration than an increase in efficiency, than our good work being done behind the scenes by scientists for 17 years, and by us actually not having FDA approval. We don't have FDA approval. This is emergency use authorization.
Okay. I have a question. Dr. Lovey.
Hello, Dr. Morgan. How are you?
Hi.
Great. So happy to have you on here.
Thank you.
Amazing information. I wish I had more of my family that could tune in. And I know you probably have to go soon. I had a question that's a little bit off topic, but it's still relevant. And I mean, I feel like this is maybe a underlying theme also for some of the hesitancy about this vaccine. But so when we look at the kind of push past regulations, or the push past the extensive due diligence, I guess you could say, to get vaccines out as far as the normal process, do you foresee this happening for other pivotal diseases that are also killing Americans at alarming rates, specifically African Americans? Because we know that there are other epidemics that need to be treated at a much faster rate. And I've been in clinical trials for 10 years and been in science for longer than that. And there are other cures and answers and solutions that should have been pushed out a long time ago, but because they're having to stay within regulation to be distributed to the general public, do we foresee this COVID vaccine being kind of a catalyst for us to now have other disease processes taken care of and solutions pushed out?
Yeah, I think absolutely this has served as a model that can be a successful model for how we can accelerate drug and device development processes by doing these interim analyses. And as long as the data is positive and the safety data is good, then we can continue to move on and do a lot of these things, not successively and not in tandem, but at the same time and overlap. And so I think this is a model that is going to be reproduced in many areas, including in drug development areas where African Americans are most impacted. And one thing I will say, as we end the program, you bring up a good point. When we talk about areas where we are impacted, I would be neglectful if I didn't talk about oncology and where we are in oncology trials and cancers that specifically impact Blacks, Black women, triple negative breast cancer, prostate cancers, liver cancers, and yet we don't participate in these trials. And the cancer trials in particular, the oncology trials in particular, it's clear that they increase the rate of remission. And yet we don't participate in these trials. And is not that quality of life for our parents, our sister, our brother, or even a bit of an extended life worth us participating in these trials? Not only do we have cancers that impact us more greatly, the data, don't forget, is the data on white men, and yet the cancers are impacting us. And we're not participating in these trials when the trials themselves can help us. So, so all of that kind of comes to bear. We have some responsibility, and I'm not necessarily making it heavy on us because of all the things I said when I opened. There have been a lot of things that have happened to us in this country, and that are still ongoing. I mean, I gave very updated, relevant, today information. It's ongoing. And so this is certainly to be understood and needs to be approached carefully and thoughtfully, but we need to begin to think, when we think about clinical trials and moving away from Tuskegee and exploitation and moving more towards the thought of representation and what that means for health equity and health access. So I will end it there. I appreciate everybody inviting me tonight. You can follow me if you like on either LinkedIn, Instagram, or Twitter at Dr. Jayne Morgan. I post a Stairwell Chronicles where I answer a question about the COVID vaccine in 1 minute or less, and I explain it in 1 minute. So if you have 1 minute of your time, you can listen to many questions being answered about that. And if you don't follow me, I would, at least ask that you try to find an organization, a person, a group where you feel that you can really get trusted scientific information and data. And then that's where you use that source. And that prevents you from kind of going down these rabbit holes of, odd information. So I appreciate it. Thank you, Danielle, for inviting me.
You are so welcome. We still have so many questions. So like Dr. Morgan said, there's a total of still 12 questions left, Dr. Morgan, in the queue. So if you guys would like to reach out to Dr. Morgan, I'm sure she will have no problem answering your questions in her Stairwell talk. I follow Dr. Morgan on LinkedIn, and I told her I get my information from her. The 1 minute is like a powerful punch. So if you're definitely looking for some very clear, concise information about COVID-19, I would definitely follow Dr. Morgan. Thank you so much for
appreciate it. And you can find me on Instagram as well, or Twitter. So if you're on any of those, or LinkedIn. And LinkedIn, you have to request a friend, but I'll if you request it, I will admit you, no problem. And you can follow along. And Instagram and Twitter are just open. So it's Dr. Jayne Morgan, Jayne. If you don't follow me, just follow some organization, read the CDC, something that gives you real scientific, unbiased information and data, and an explanation that you understand in a way that you understand it. And that's why I developed those Stairwell Chronicles. It's just 1 minute of just kind of straight talk where I'm just speaking in clear terms that are not scientific. And hopefully people can understand it. And it's only 60 seconds of your time. So if you don't like it, you haven't wasted much of your time, right?
Right. I think that's definitely important, because I know a lot of times people are getting their information for someone who's not a medical doctor. So it's best to get it from someone who, has studied this. They know the information, and not to share, misinformation with people about COVID-19 vaccines or anything. So I want to thank you again so much, Dr. Morgan, and thank you everyone for joining us. So sorry we weren't able to answer all the questions, but please reach out to Dr. Morgan or myself, and we can get your questions answered. Thank you, everyone, and have a great night.
Bye.